testimony from the second panel. Let me introduce each of you. Lieutenant General Larry D. James is the commander of the 14th Air Force Space Command and commander of the Joint Functional Component Command for Space, U.S. Strategic Command in Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. He leads more than 20,500 personnel responsible for providing missile warning, space superiority, space situational awareness, satellite operations, space launch, and range operations. General James holds a B.S. from the United States Air Force Academy and an M.S. from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Ms. Karen Van Dyke is the Director for Position Navigation and Timing, Research and Innovative Technology Administration in the Department of Transportation. Ms. Van Dyke was a member of a team that conducted a study for the Office of the Secretary of Transportation to identify and analyze GPS vulnerabilities and interference mitigation techniques for all modes of transportation. Ms. Van Dyke holds both a B.S. and an M.S. from the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. Nice to see Massachusetts so well represented here today. Mr. F. Michael Swick currently serves as Executive Director of the United States GPS Industry Council, which he helped to found with the leading U.S. GPS manufacturers in 1991. Mr. Swick is also currently president of Mike International, LLC, a consulting practice concentrating on policy and regulatory issues affecting various issues in high technology trade. He served for 10 years with the Central Intelligence Agency, working on expert control and technology security issues. He holds a B.A. from Bowdoin College and an M.A. from Georgetown University. Mr. Chet Huber currently serves as president of OnStar Corporation, a wholly owned subsidiary of General Motors Corporation. He joined General Motors Electric Motive Division as a co-op engineering student in 1972 and held a variety of engineering, operations, and marketing roles before joining OnStar. I guess you'd call that job security, huh? His positions included Director of the Aftermarket Business, General Director of Aftermarket Parts and Service, and General Director of Sales, Marketing, and Product Support. Mr. Huber holds a B.S. from General Motors Institute, now Kettering University, and an M.B.A. from Harvard University. I want to thank all of you for making yourselves available here today and helping us out with your testimony. Again, it's the policy of the committee to swear in witnesses before they testify, so if you please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Thank you. The record will please reflect that all of the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. As with the first panel, your full written statements will be entered on the record. There's 5-minute opening statements. The lights are the same for the second panel as they were for the first. And then we'll go to questions if the panel members up here have any. General, would you please start?
Well, Chairman Tierney and Ranking Member Flake, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'm honored to be here as the commander of the Joint Functional Component Command for Space. It's a privilege to address you on our role in operating the Global Positioning System, as well as represent the combatant commander users around the globe. My testimony today focuses on the importance of GPS to the warfighter, the health of our current constellation, and U.S. Strategic Command strategies to ensure the most robust space-based positioning, navigation, and timing capabilities are provided by the GPS constellation. Certainly, as we have heard earlier, as we look to the importance of GPS, we understand that GPS provides that key PNT or position navigation and timing data to users worldwide and has truly become essential to U.S. national security and economic well-being. GPS is the centerpiece of global PNT services, and the GPS constellation enables an ever-increasing arsenal of military and civil applications. GPS provides critical services to our forces around the globe, from infantrymen walking the streets of Fallujah, to ships combating piracy off the Straits of Somalia, and to aircraft patrolling our country's borders. It is evident that GPS is critical to successful military operations. Strong communications links, operational relationships, and reach back ensure that U.S. Strategic Command provides the combatant effects that the U.S. combatant commanders need around the globe. As we look at our constellation health and status, we have today exceeded requirements by maintaining a constellation of 30 operational satellites, and we've achieved sub-3-meter accuracy with that constellation. As you heard earlier, by employing residual operations and power management, we have options to maintain full GPS capabilities and ensure continued support to global users. We must continue to focus on future requirements for GPS capabilities. Matching future user requirements with technological advances will allow U.S. Strategic Command to provide the most advanced and reliable space effects in response to the growing demands of the nation's GPS users. In conclusion, the United States' dependence on GPS across our military, civil, and commercial users requires PNT capabilities to ensure our ability to safely and effectively operate in diverse environments. The DoD must continue to build the relationships, processes, and capabilities within the global space community that allow us to operate effectively together to meet our national security objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General. Ms. Van Dyke.
Chairman Tierney, Ranking Member Flake, and member of the subcommittee. I am Karen Van Dyke, Acting Director for Positioning, Navigation, and Timing in the U.S. Department of Transportation's Research and Innovative Technology Administration, RETA. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the criticality of the global positioning system to the civil user community. GPS technology is increasingly woven into the fabric of American society, from cars and planes to cell phones and wristwatches. It improves productivity and efficiency in many areas of commerce. For example, today's construction, farming, mining, shipping, surveying, and traffic management systems have become dependent on GPS. It allows agriculture operations to continue through low visibility conditions such as rain, dust, fog, and darkness, and to apply chemicals precisely, reducing environmental impact while also reducing production costs. GPS also furthers scientific aims such as weather forecasting, earthquake prediction, and environmental protection. Furthermore, the precise GPS time signal derived from atomic clocks is embedded in critical economic activities such as synchronizing communication networks, managing power grids, and authenticating electronic transactions. Of particular interest to the Department of Transportation is the Federal Aviation Administration's Next Generation Air Transportation NextGen program. NextGen is a wide-ranging transformation of the national air transportation system to meet future demand and support economic viability of the system. NextGen will reduce fuel burn and greenhouse gas emissions, allow more direct, time-based routings, enable safer operations, and reduce runway incursions. United Airlines already has pioneered the use of tailored arrivals based on GPS from Honolulu to San Francisco with a fuel savings of 1,600 pounds per flight. GPS is the foundation for next-gen navigation and surveillance. The continuity of funding and integrity of the planned launch schedule of the GPS constellation is vital to the nation moving ahead with next-gen. I would like to thank the Air Force for their dedicated service in providing extremely reliable operation of GPS since it achieved initial operating capability in 1993. The United States clearly is a leader in space-based positioning, navigation, and timing, and we must continue to maintain and improve GPS to maintain this U.S. technology leadership position. Sustainability of the GPS constellation is critical to users worldwide. The Department of Transportation is committed to modernization of GPS, and fully funding the DOT portion of GPS modernization for new civil capabilities is critical to ensuring that the GPS 3 program remains on schedule to ensure future constellation sustainment. The Department of Transportation is confident that the Department of Defense will continue to operate GPS at or above the minimum GPS performance standard commitment of 21 healthy satellites 98% of the time, equivalent to 24 healthy satellites 95% of the time, and will find innovative methods to extend the life of the GPS satellites to prevent any gaps in availability. We recognize that the GPS system has exceeded performance commitments with 30 satellites currently operational, and that some users may have come to expect this level of service. The Department of Transportation is a provider, as well as a user, of GPS services, augmenting the GPS signal to improve accuracy and integrity. FAA provides the Wide Area Augmentation System, WAAS, and RETA coordinates resources and plans for the inland component of the nationwide differential GPS system, NDGPS, operated and maintained by the U.S. Coast Guard. The U.S. Air Force, U.S. Coast Guard, and Federal Aviation Administration have agreements to coordinate and provide notification of GPS performance and any disruptions of GPS service to the user community. When the constellation is at its minimum GPS performance commitment, outages for aviation and other users will be experienced on a routine basis, which could result in complaints and economic impact. For users who equip with GPS augmented by WAAS, these impacts are reduced, supporting minimum availability requirements of 99% or more. However, like any radio navigation system, GPS is vulnerable to interference that can be reduced but not eliminated. In 2001, RETA's Volpe National Transportation Systems Center issued the vulnerability assessment of the transportation infrastructure relying on the global positioning system. The findings of this assessment indicated that there was awareness within the transportation community of risks associated with use of GPS as a primary means for position determination and precision timing. Due to the reliance of transportation on GPS signals, it is essential that threats be mitigated and alternative backups be available, and the system be hardened for critical applications. DOT has determined that sufficient alternative navigation aids currently exist in the event of a loss of GPS-based service. Potential backup capabilities to GPS are being explored as part of a national positioning, navigation, and timing architecture study initiated in 2006 by the Department of Defense and Department of Transportation. The overarching goal of this architecture, with GPS as its cornerstone, is intended to overcome identified capability gaps and achieve an evolutionary path to providing integrated space-based, terrestrial, and autonomous solutions in the 2025 time period that will ensure the continuity of government-provided PNT services. In conclusion, I would like to thank the committee for allowing me to discuss the civil user perspective of GPS. The Department of Transportation is committed to continuing our strong working relationship with the Department of Defense to maintain our global leadership in space-based PNT. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Zwick, you may proceed. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Chairman Tierney, Ranking Member Flake, Mr. Kucinich, and distinguished members of the subcommittee for providing an opportunity today to discuss this important topic. The Global Positioning System, or GPS, is one of the great U.S. success stories involving a shared national asset. GPS is a national model of successfully balancing military advantage and civilian equities to serve a broad and diverse range of national interests, from national security and public safety to enabling critical infrastructures, advancing scientific research, facilitating local government productivity, and enhancing the productivity and competitiveness of diverse industries that are important to our economy and serving millions of individual Americans every day. GPS is a model of government-industry cooperation, contributing to the national economy through the entrepreneurial creation of companies, industries, and jobs, deriving value for users from integrating GPS positioning, navigation, and timing information into applications and solutions. The initial military investment in GPS has not only met military requirements and demonstrated invaluable military utility for the warfighter, it also provided a signal for civilian use at little to no additional cost. The dedicated men and women of the U.S. Air Force Space Command have achieved superb operational management of the GPS constellation for all users under Air Force stewardship of GPS. This operational excellence, together with predictable U.S. policy over 2 decades, has given the global community a stable, reliable signal that has provided a solid foundation for tremendous private sector investments in receiver and applications innovation. The result of this enlightened U.S. approach has been the worldwide adoption of GPS as a global information utility, providing major productivity benefits to the nation. It is difficult to say with precision just how big the GPS industry is, because it touches and contributes to so many different applications and areas in so many ways. Some recent estimates have impressive numbers, such as $15 to $50 billion per year or more, depending on how one counts direct and indirect effects of GPS. GPS is a core information technology for many industries that are key to the U.S. economy. Examples include agriculture, aviation, construction, vehicle navigation, fleet management, public safety, geographical information systems, land use, environmental monitoring, earthquake monitoring, wildlife monitoring, disaster management, telecommunications, E911 cell phones, mapping, mining, marine transportation, surveying, infotainment. I could go on probably for hours, but trust me, there's at least a couple of hundred more. More impressive than the aggregate value of U.S. or worldwide GPS industries is the effect that GPS can have on the productivity and competitiveness of key industries. GPS enhances productivity at times as much as 30% through exploitation of precise positioning, navigation, and timing information. It is not an exaggeration to say that GPS is everywhere, not only where we commonly and almost ubiquitously see it, such as in consumer car navigation devices such as OnStar or the Garmin on the dashboard. It is there, essential, and critical even where you don't realize it. Whenever you make a call on your cell phone, withdraw money from your ATM, send an email, you are using GPS. GPS precise time signals are essential tools for synchronizing the networks through which these services operate. Turn on a light, and you're probably using GPS as well, as electric power grids similarly use GPS precise time signals for synchronization and fault detection. The roads you drive on may have been built by construction equipment guided by GPS. Not only has the term GPS become a common term in the public lexicon, it has become an essential and critical utility on which public and private infrastructures depend. U.S. industry has been a major factor and leader in the development of today's GPS industry through entrepreneurial vision, technological innovation, and private sector investment. But we have not done this alone. The U.S. government has promoted and encouraged this development by establishing, maintaining, and reinforcing a stable policy framework that has consistently received far-sighted and bipartisan support. It has been a true partnership of shared visions, discussions, and debates, cooperation, and coordination. This has been possible through the open dialogue that has taken place since the early days of GPS, some 25-plus years ago, between civilian and military, industry and government on technical and policy issues as the technology, system, and applications have evolved. As we move forward to new generations of GPS satellites and signals, the successful adoption of modernized civilian GPS signals will occur if the installed user base can continue to trust the consistent and stable policy framework that the U.S. government has provided for GPS for 2 decades. The new signals will need to sustain a legacy of accuracy, availability, and reliability established over the past 20 years. The adoption of GPS is a testament to the trust of users in Air Force stewardship. Users rely on the ability of the Air Force to operate and maintain the satellite constellation and stable signal structures that serve the warfighter and diverse civilian users in a way that enhances both our national and economic security. We strongly encourage the continuation of the open and balanced dialogue between all stakeholders, users and providers, civilian and military, industry and government. Our industry association strives to be an objective information resource to support this dialogue. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Huber, before we go to you, there is a vote on right now. The chairman, Mr. Tierney, went to vote. He's coming back momentarily. So what we're going to do, I'm going to declare a 5-minute recess. I believe that Mr. Tierney will probably be back in a minute, but I'm going to go to make sure that I don't miss my vote. And so we will be in recess, let's call it until the call of the chair, and my guess is it'll be within 5 minutes. Thank you.
Allowed to save you all some time on that, but Mr. Kucinich apparently thought that the vote was closer than it was to ending. I've read all your testimony, so I don't want you to think that we're ignoring you on that. We read them last evening. So, Mr. Huber, I understand that you're about ready to put yours on the record, and I ask you to do so.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chet Huber, the president of OnStar, a wholly owned subsidiary of General Motors Corporation. I also serve as a member on the NASA PNT Advisory Board, and I've also served on the CDC's Advisory Committee on Injury Prevention and Control. With nearly 6 million active subscribers, OnStar is the leading telematics service provider employing over 2,200 individuals in the United States and Canada. OnStar is now standard on virtually all General Motors vehicles and has developed a prominent national brand position. Our core safety, security, and peace of mind services include automatic crash response and emergency services, which we deliver from 3 call centers in Pontiac, Michigan, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Oshawa, Ontario, Canada. Other services include turn-by-turn navigation, stolen vehicle location assistance, and monthly OnStar vehicle diagnostic emails. We also offer one-button, hands-free, prepaid wireless calling. In a typical month after call screening, we provide unique and critical support for public safety agencies in responding to over 2,000 automatic crash notifications and over 10,000 occupant-initiated emergency button presses. These include heart attacks, strokes, and crashes not triggering an automatic call. Last November, OnStar marked its 100,000th automatic crash response. Monthly, we also pass on to public safety over 6,000 Good Samaritan calls for everything from crashes involving other vehicles to roadway hazards to possible Amber Alert sightings. And we assist with over 500 stolen vehicle location requests including on many new vehicles the ability to actually slow down a vehicle to avoid a high-speed pursuit. Other monthly service statistics include the delivery of 3.4 million monthly diagnostic emails, nearly 1 million turn-by-turn routes, and over 53,000 remote door unlocks. Delivering these services and growing to our current scale has required deep and fundamental technological innovation as we've uniquely integrated cellular, GPS, and voice recognition with extensive onboard and offboard software. This has required hundreds of millions of dollars of investment and resulted in the filing of over 500 patent applications, with new filings still occurring at the rate of once every 6 days. A critical element in our delivery of services is location. OnStar uses the civilian L1CA signal to deliver our location-based services like automatic crash response, stolen vehicle location assistance, and turn-by-turn navigation. We also use directly or indirectly the GPS timing signal to enable other valuable services like remote door unlock and diagnostic emails. An accurate, available, and reliable GPS constellation is at the heart of our capability to deliver these services. We offer 3 recommendations for your consideration. First, we must address the health of the current constellation. We are concerned that a recent report shows that 8 of the current satellites are 1 component away from total failure. Loss of signal will immediately affect GPS accuracy and availability. Second, as the GPS system is modernized, it's imperative that the U.S. government formally commit to preserving the L1CA signal to ensuring backward compatibility for legacy applications with no loss of performance from current levels. Automotive applications of GPS, like OnStar, are embedded into the vehicle's electrical system and subjected to extensive validation testing. Because of this, it's impractical to retrofit GPS-related hardware and assure the reliable delivery of services to subscribers. Therefore, to the benefit of our millions of customers, as well as others facing similar legacy issues, we're asking Congress and the executive branch to work together to develop a policy that supports backward compatibility at current performance levels. Regarding performance, it's important to understand that the current GPS system is performing at a level well above the specified minimum, and operators have come to use that performance to improve and enhance services. Any modernization initiative that degrades backward compatible performance, such as reducing the number of satellites making up the constellation, would likely adversely impact the provisioning of services by OnStar, including the quality of location information we provide to public safety, thereby potentially increasing the response time of public safety personnel to crash victims and others in need of emergency assistance. Our third recommendation, and this is also important to legacy applications, is that we commit to maintaining the current PRN code for the primary orbital slots as satellites in those slots are replaced. Legacy hardware is not capable of being expanded to accommodate more than 32 slots, so renumbering above 32 will likely affect performance of legacy applications. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you for your testimony. Mr. Huber, those concerns that you raised, the final 3 on that, are you having any dialogue at all with the Department of Defense now or with the combined committee about making sure that those are addressed?
We actually have had an opportunity to participate as a member of the PNT Advisory Committee, and that, I think, is one of the reasons that that committee was formed by NASA, to draw in comments from private industry and other constituencies. And we've also had extensive dialogue with the U.S. Department of Transportation and others. So we are making those points.
And your sense is that you're being heard?
Yeah, our sense is that they understand the issues, and we're hopeful that they'll be comprehended in the future strategy.
Great. I have sort of a painless approach to this, I hope, for all of you. There's really 3 things I think we want to know and put on the record from you. I'm going to lay all of them out and then just go left to right and give you a chance to respond. We're interested in the awareness throughout either your particular entity or industry that you, or area that you represent, the awareness of the concerns raised by the Government Accountability Office's report. We'd like to know if you've identified potential mitigation strategies to lessen the effect on your company or entity or association in event there's a diminished availability to the worst case scenarios laid out in that report. And lastly, what's your status of preparation to implement any such strategies? General?
Yes, sir. In terms of the awareness, certainly at the JFCC Space, my position, and Strategic Command, Air Force Space Command, all of those entities, because they're so closely intertwined with the acquisition community, we certainly are very aware of the GAO report, of the constellation management issues and those sorts of things. In speaking for the broader combatant commanders out there, the CENTCOMs and the PACOMs of the world, I can't say that they are necessarily aware that there's a potential of possible degradation in the future. Their concern obviously is more near-term focused. Am I getting my GPS signal today? And so on. Certainly, as a representative of those combatant commanders, we go out and educate the theater on what they can and can't do with all of our space systems, and we will continue to do that over time as this unfolds. So that's kind of from an awareness perspective.
Yeah, you know, except one of the things I thought I heard in the first panel is one of the strategies for the military to maybe deal with this issue is to use some and power down some of the backup in certain cases or whatever. I would assume you're exempting out the battlefield people from that type of a distinction, or do they also have to make that kind of a consideration when they use the system?
No, sir. The intent is obviously not to affect any user. In terms of the potential mitigation strategies, which is where I would address that question, we as the operators of GPS out of Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado, as you heard earlier, have a variety of things that we look at. Certainly, first of all, we have residual satellites. We generally only operate a certain number of what we call PRN codes for the constellation. And so right now we have 3 satellites that are not a part of that constellation, but that can still provide an effective navigation signal. That's just due to the limitations of the ground system in terms of how many satellites we can actually operate into the constellation. So we have 3 residual spacecraft right now. We bring those out of the residual mode every 6 months to test them and make sure that they still have a valid navigation signal. So that's one of the mitigation strategies we currently have. As satellites, older satellites, no longer can fit into the constellation, we still retain them as a viable system that we can bring in should we have an unexpected failure. The second piece of that is, as you heard earlier, is power management. And that is one way to, again, extend the life of a particular spacecraft. And again, there is a lot of analysis that will go into that in terms of how does that affect the other user, the new detection system user. Again, as you heard, as we continue to launch new satellites, we continue to populate that new detection system capability, and they do not require a full 24 satellite capability. So we have options there with the older satellites to power manage and extend the life of those particular spacecraft. And thirdly is, as you also heard earlier, the GPS constellation isn't kind of an on or off thing. It's a dynamic, integrated assessment of if you get down to a certain level of satellites, where do you have less accuracy, where do you have less coverage time, and so on. And we manage that by where we actually place the particular spacecraft in the constellation. So in terms of how we mitigate this, we do have options to make sure that if we do create an issue with a less accurate area, we can put that perhaps over an area where there are very few people or very few operations. And then finally, in terms of your status in preparing for this, we do think about this, we have thought about this, we do have plans to address this as we move to the future and we see how the constellation evolves and how those satellites are delivered to us for launch.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Van Dyke.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In terms of the awareness of concerns, I think the GAO has done a really good job within the government, reaching out to all of the government agencies to circulate their draft report. But of course, it hasn't been released to the public yet, so as it's released, certainly our job in representing the civil community is to ensure that there is awareness. But having said that, the Department of Transportation, and particularly our organization, RETA, leads the Civil GPS Service Interface Committee, which is the public outreach on the status of GPS. And at all of our meetings, we have the GPS Wing and Air Force Space Command give a status update on the constellations. And so certainly the awareness of some of the status problems, the availability of satellites, some of the potential problems have been briefed at the meetings. And also, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the Volpe National Transportation System Center had done a vulnerability assessment, and so while it's a separate problem being concerned about interference to the signal, a lot of the mitigations would be the same. So we have certainly tried to make the user community aware of potential interference, the need to integrate GPS with other navigation aids or have operational procedures to mitigate the problem, which would also apply to any degradation due to availability of GPS satellites. And then in terms of the status of the preparation, again, it's very similar to the need for backup systems to mitigate against interference. So we have been aware and certainly working with the user communities, particularly for federally provided systems, to ensure for transportation safety of life that we do not have any degradation of service, and that continues to be an ongoing challenge as GPS just becomes integrated into every single application, and often, particularly for timing applications, is the silent enabler that many do not even have awareness of how well and how widely it's used in our communication systems.
Thank you. Mr. Swick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as awareness goes of potential gaps in GPS or degradation of services, answer that from our community, which is primarily the receiver manufacturers and to some degree the user and customer community. Answer is yes and no. Among the technical people in the companies manufacturing the receivers, yes, they're aware of constellation status. Yes, they receive briefings from the Air Force at different conferences. They see the status of the constellation over a period of years. They monitor that. So are they aware that there is a potential degradation of current status of the constellations? Yes. When you start getting to the public at large, the users of GPS, particularly in the consumer area, I would say there the awareness is probably nowhere near as great, mainly because GPS works and has worked reliably for many, many years. It's when you go to the faucet and turn on the water in your house. It works. You don't think about it. You only think about it if you have a warning that something imminent is going to happen or has happened, and you need to take adjustments to compensate for that. So the awareness issue, yes and no. Engineers, technical people, people in the manufacturing community, yes. What would be the impact of gaps in coverage, degradation of services? Again, difficult to say because of the broad scope and reach of GPS into different types of applications. Mitigation plans and strategies, yes, again, difficult to say. Depends on if it happens, when it happens, where it happens, to whom it happens. Degree of disruption, again, difficult to pinpoint exactly. There's a wide variety of areas. Public safety areas like air transportation, like marine transportation, E911, some of the critical timing applications. If there was a serious degradation that would cause a disruption or outage of GPS, yes, it would be felt and noticed. However, the people who put these systems together are very prudent and very cautious, so there are usually backup systems already in place, because not only from a degradation of constellation status, but there are other factors that could cause vulnerabilities to the system, and these have largely been accommodated to a certain degree. As far as the consumer end, if there is a degradation of service, well, you tend to get that anyway when you're using GPS in a casual, recreational environment now. The GPS unit in your car frequently is blocked by tall buildings, heavy tree cover, etc., as you're driving along. This, in effect, reduces the number of effective satellites you can see, or the optimal navigation solution that you're using. Does it mean that the whole system goes down and it becomes useless? No. Again, it may compromise some degree of accuracy or availability, but in general, it doesn't cause a major problem. If this becomes systemic and endemic over a long period of time, then I think the biggest problem you see is a loss in confidence in GPS as a market force, and that can have some consequences. But in general, the Air Force has done a marvelous job of giving a signal that nobody has to think about, they only use and take benefit from. So I hope this clarifies some things for you.
No, it's helpful, and I think part of this, of course, is that the GAO report is in fact a warning shot. It's not imminent. It's something that's going to slap people in the face, but it is at least a notice to people that we better start paying attention and we better start working through this. Yes, you want to add something?
Just add one more thing, and in this regard, again, we haven't seen the full GAO report yet. Is it released to the public now?
Today.
Today, okay.
Today. That's why the hearing.
I'll make sure our member companies receive that. But this type of, call it awareness building, along with the outreach that the Air Force and Department of Transportation, Department of Defense do to the civilian community, I think shows a responsible stewardship of GPS. They don't hide things and sweep them under the rug. It's there so everybody knows. Exactly. And this, I think, is another hallmark and a good sign of prudent U.S. stewardship of GPS.
Good, thank you. Now, Mr. Huber, we know you're aware from the content of your testimony, of course, or whatever, but in your particularized use for it, what strategies would you put in place?
Yeah, we're very aware not of the GAO report. We're absolutely looking forward to seeing that. We've thought about this, as you might expect, because we're selling a commercial product today. We have millions of customers, and at the heart of what we do is an emergency response to things like a crash of a vehicle. And so we have been developing methods, even in those situations where we are strained today, like in urban canyons, to actually, we've created unique software in the vehicle where we use the wheel speed sensors from anti-lock brake systems to provide dead reckoning that gives us an ability to keep an accurate location on the vehicle within bounds as we're shaded from GPS. We're starting now, actually, with the launch of the new Camaro. We're actually building gyros into vehicles to give us the next level of precision. And that will help us in any degradation sense. So it helps us be better at our normal services. It'll also help us in any scenario where we're otherwise shaded. In places like the Big Dig in Boston, I mean, it gives us a great opportunity to get people through that the way they want to come through it. The thing that is of most concern to us longer term is in the cases where there are literally gaps, geographic gaps in coverage across the United States that move depending on what the constellation configuration looks like and how many satellites are up. If you saw a map from our last November announcement of our 100,000th crash response, you can see we populate the United States. There are crashes everywhere in this country, not just in very populated areas. And so we're actually working with Verizon Wireless as a key technology partner for us in our most extreme use case of crash response to see what we might be able to use in the case of a missing GPS component to be able to use their network-derived solutions to at least be able to help us respond in an emergency case. It won't help us in a navigation scenario, but at that point our main obligation, our main commitment is the emergency community.
Thank you. Mr. Kucinich, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To General James, and Mr. Chairman, you may have asked some of these questions. I just returned, so I'm not, if I duplicated, I apologize ahead of time. Who updates the GPS data, and how often is it updated?
Sir, if you're referring to the data that goes into the satellites, that is done by the Operations Squadron at Schriever Air Force Base. They are solely dedicated to managing that constellation and providing uploads when required. They can determine when a signal is starting to degrade below a certain level, and then they actually put an upload into the spacecraft to update its position so that then we maintain that high level of accuracy. So that's the responsibility of the Air Force out at Schriever Air Force Base.
Where do you get the data? Where do you get the data from, though?
So the data is from our ground network of systems around the world that monitor GPS at different locations, at Ascension Island, Hawaii, Guam. So we're constantly looking at the constellation and the satellites and measuring their accuracy, because over time that accuracy does degrade. And so we monitor that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and provide those uploads into the spacecraft as required.
So the accuracy of the information at any given time, would you ascribe a percentage to it?
Well, sir, again, our intent is to maintain a worldwide accuracy below 3 meters. And so,
of what, please?
Sir, below 3 meters. Now, again, that's better than the specification that we have because we have a good number of satellites that are very capable with very accurate atomic clocks on board. But again, worldwide, we have the ability to monitor those accuracies around the globe. We have the software that tells us exactly what the accuracies are at any given time and any given location.
Does the Department of Defense lease the information that it has to private contractors, or sell it, or in any way distribute it to other contractors?
No, sir. We do not. If you're talking about that knowledge of what accuracy a GPS satellite has, that's actually inherent in the signal of GPS. So it's not leased or sold. It's available.
And it's available, but we know, for example, there are companies who, excuse me, who sell GPS services.
Yes,
and
sir.
So they don't have their own network the way that Department of Defense has. Where do they? How are they able to do that?
Well, sir, I believe a couple of things. When you say selling GPS services, one is a GPS receiver. So if you
so
buy,
they're selling receivers that they then get the same information through that receiver that anybody else could get. Is that what you're
yes,
saying?
sir, absolutely. Or they may create a service where they use GPS, for example, mechanized farming, that they sell that overall service, which involves a GPS receiver and other processes to execute that.
But anybody's free to do that. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
and but the underlying technology is, and the mapping and the updating of it is accomplished through the resources of the United States government. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Are there any other nations that are involved in a cooperative effort with us on that?
Sir, there are, to my knowledge, no other nations in terms of providing funding for the GPS. We operate the system and we provide that to our allies without charge.
And do you get do other nations help provide the data where we don't necessarily have people present to provide the information? Do we have gaps that are being filled in?
No, sir. Again, it's those worldwide sites. For example, the Ascension Island site is certainly, that's a British island, so we have agreements with the British to operate there. But again, we provide for all the operational cost of those sites around the world.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General.
Thank you. I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to share with us anything that you think we ought to know and didn't have the foresight to ask before I wrap up. And it doesn't mean that there necessarily is something, but I give you the opportunity at any rate. General?
Sir, just briefly, I think, again, I would state as we look at GPS accuracies and GPS capabilities, it is a very layered problem. As we said earlier, it's not a black and white thing. We can manage this. We can look through in terms of power, in terms of clocks, in terms of updates, in terms of where we place the satellites in the constellation to make sure that we provide the capability that we need to provide where we need to provide it. So I would just leave that thought for the committee.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Van Wyck? Van Dyke, rather?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to reiterate the Department of Transportation's commitment to the modernization of GPS for new civil capabilities. As Major General McCaslin said, the Department of Transportation is now funding for those capabilities, and it is important for the sustainment of the GPS-3 constellation that we have the adequate funding to provide to the Air Force. And I'd just like to reiterate our strong working relationship with the Department of Defense. I think that we've had really good information sharing and a very cooperative process, and I certainly anticipate that will continue.
Thank you. Mr. Swick?
Just like to emphasize that GPS is really an example of government done right. You don't hear that too often these days.
Unless you account for the 100-and-something% overrun in cost and 3 years in delays, but there you go. It's interesting. It goes to Mr. Duncan's point.
Yes.
There's not a bit of upset or anger of anybody in here on that, and it is sort of startling when you think about it. It was a $700-and-something million project that cost $870 million more than that, and it's 3 years late.
Yeah.
And we don't get a blink. It's just interesting. If that were an education program or a health program or something like that, people would be going ballistic.
Well, both my parents were accountants, and they would see an awful lot of fault with that as well. But as far as the delivered performance of GPS,
once it gets going, it does well, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's really a great success story. The main thing is maintain the integrity of the signal, maintain the delivered performance, maintain the dialogue between industry, government, between military civilian users, and the forums that we've had, because it really has been a wonderful cooperative approach. Delays, outages, overruns, et cetera, yes, these are all of concern. And as the system has matured and expanded, these maybe were inevitable, but they need to be addressed. And for that regard, we're glad that this subcommittee and others in government are beginning to look at this.
Thank you.
So
thank you, Mr.
Continue on.
Ms. Huber?
I'd only say the GPS system has evolved into an amazing public utility, and I would say that things like OnStar were probably not conceived of when those satellites were launched. I would suggest that if you project any vision of a future, this system will spawn incredible further innovation that'll bring a range of benefits to society and spawn technology and job creation. And so thinking of this today, it's almost unfair to not understand what hasn't been invented yet, but this is ripe territory for commercial applications in particular, and those that overlap with public sector agencies to create a better future for a lot of people. And so I'd say that's the vector that this thing's headed on.
Thank you. Well, I thank you for all your comments. Look, this has become an incredible system, and I agree with you. The technology is astounding. It has done a lot of good things. One of the reasons why the subcommittee is so intent on having the oversight is that we need this to continue working. Our reliance on national security issues obviously are very serious and very critical, but it's had enlightening effects on the industries and the civil market as well. So we want to make sure that it functions and it comes up in a timely manner, it doesn't get degraded, but we do also have that responsibility of seeing that it happens on time and within budget, within reason, because we don't have an unlimited budget. We have a lot of pressures on this country, and so we want to try to make sure that we have a continuation of these hearings. This will not be the last one. We might not have to hear from you folks again for a while, but the first panel will be revisited again along with others to address some of those questions on why we would take a system that was working in terms of oversight and kick it out the door and try something that was obviously not very successful. So thank you for giving up your time and making the effort to be here with us today, sharing your expertise. We really do appreciate it. Thanks. Meeting adjourned.